Good morning. My name is Trey George. I'm with the City of Spokane, and I'm the moderator today for the presentation that Don McQuilliams is going to give us on managing natural systems in an urban environment. If you have any questions along the way, please put them in the chat box, and at the end of the presentation, if we have some time, we'll give Don a chance to field some questions. And if we run long, we can't run long. We have a hard stop. You'll be able to get hold of Don after the fact. And with that, I'll let Don take it from here.
All right, thank you for that. Thanks for having me today, guys. I was approached by Lori a little while back asking to participate in this conference and give a presentation, so I tried to come up with something a little more unique than the normal presentations I give. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about how we manage our natural systems in the city of Bellevue. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is defining our natural systems, establishing some maintenance policies and practices. I'm going to go through some case studies of why we do what we do, and then talk to you a little bit about how we do our planning and permitting related to natural systems. So first off, let's make sure we're talking about the same thing. So we define natural systems for the purpose of this conversation as waters of the state. So these are streams, rivers, lakes, and tributary open channels. These are not ditches, pipes associated with your MS4. Those are under the restrictions of the NPDES permit, so they may or may not apply to what we're talking about today. So let's just keep this focused on the waters of the state. You may also have some open spaces in your system where you own some property, forested land, wetland, etc., whether that be in your utility, your public works department, or just owned in general by the city. So why am I talking about natural systems today? So in Bellevue, we define our storm and surface water system, and we also refer to it as our drainage system, as the entire system within the city, both public and private, naturally existing and man-made for the drainage, conveyance, detention, treatment, or storage of the storm and surface waters. So that right there pulls in my natural systems to be part of my storm and surface water system as I manage it across the city. To go on a little further, my storm and surface water system plan has a mission statement in it that says I have a surface water system that controls damage from storms, protects the surface water quality, supports fish and wildlife habitat, and protects the environment. Why do I mention this to you? Because these two policies give me the authority to go work in natural systems. I don't have to go back and gate that authority from my management, from my city managers. When I have an emergency, it's already written into my code, so it allows me to do that. So I want you to look at your organization's policies and mission statements, and do your policies and mission statements give you that authority up front? If not, you may want to think about going and talking to folks about establishing that inside of your policy. Also look at your city comprehensive plan. I know in ours, there's a lot of ties to the environment, to natural systems, and how that works. And then are there any other policies that you need to consider as you look at your natural systems? Okay, once you've established your policies and procedures a little bit, now you got to figure out who's going to do the work and when. So we have this very simple little grid that we give to all of our staff, so they have a good understanding of how and why we do work. So you got to consider who owns the property. Do you have any easements or other agreements on those properties? What are the impacts threatening your public infrastructure that would have you go in and do some work in a natural system? And is it an emergency? Are there homes and businesses that are going to flood as a result? So my simple little grid here on the left is who owns that property. So if it's public ownership or under a public easement, and the impacted location is either public or private, so it could be a roadway, it could be a culvert, it could be somebody's business or residence. The city will take the lead on that because we own that property, have an obligation across it. If the property is owned in private ownership, but that impacted location is now public, so it's going to flood a roadway, it's going to block a culvert, something along those lines, we will step in and do the maintenance on those to open it up because that's going to affect our public infrastructure. Now, if it's a private to private matter where we have a beaver dam that's going to overtop a bank and it's going to flood an associated business from one to the other, that is not something the city of Bellevue will step in and do work on unless it is an active emergency. Goes back to that on the left, very bottom. Is somebody going to flood? And when I mean flooding, I mean water inside of the living areas, not nuisance flooding where it's in their parking lot. Okay, let's look at a few types of maintenance and why we do maintenance on some of these open space or natural system areas. So I'm going to talk to you about some case examples of brush clearing, sediment removal, beaver dam maintenance, flood protection, permit required maintenance, and emergency response. So brush clearing, in this example, in the 1980s, our engineering team had a wonderful idea to build a flood control water quality project just downstream of Phantom Lake and construct a new stream channel that would carry the water through the parkland there quicker and more efficiently than the previous wetland that used to exist. The two pictures you're seeing are actually that stream channel. And we go in every year and we cut this brush out of the stream channel and we haul it off site so that stream channel can function as designed. The design is down in the bottom right. Why do we do this? Because we've built this project, and as part of the project, maintenance standards were set, and we've been doing those since the 80s. So Utilities now owns this project going into the future. Bellevue has about a half dozen what we call sediment removal ponds. These are in-stream or off-stream facilities. They're specifically designed to capture sediment from the streams from storm events, drop that sediment out, and then we have a means to reroute those streams around so we can excavate that sediment. Why do we have these? Most of these are a result of land use practices, legal settlements, easement agreements. They all have some legal component to them. So what's involved in a project like this? Well, they can get very big very fast. This picture you're seeing here, we call it Anna's Pond. And this one has a stream bypass that we have to put in place. We have to dewater the entire pond. Once the stream bypass is in place, we have to remove all of the fish without killing any of them, move them upstream or downstream and account for all of them before we can even think about putting our excavators in there. All right, everybody's favorite, beaver dam maintenance. So it seems like over the last 10 years, I want to say around 2010, the beaver population really started to explode in the urban environment, and it's been going like crazy ever since. That picture in the upper left was one I ran into one day who was out sunbathing when I was out wandering around the site. I think he was just there to taunt me. That picture on the upper right, I'm going to talk to you about a little more on the next slide. That's a picture of a dam that we do regular maintenance on. And then this tree picture down the bottom left that's cut. I showed up on a Friday, and that's about a 12 to 14 inch cottonwood. And on Friday, there was no marks on that tree whatsoever. I came back Monday, and that tree had been completely cut down and was laying over the top of this dam that you see up here because we did maintenance on it on that Friday. And apparently the beaver did not like that, so he dropped it right on top of his dam. A little more on beaver maintenance. So why do we do what we do? So that picture on the left is what you're seeing now is after that Friday's of maintenance of dropping that dam down to notch it. So this is what we call routine maintenance of our dams. And when do we use this approach? So we use this approach where we have beaver dams that are not an active threat to our facilities. Maybe they're upstream a little bit, but we don't want that dam to get too big or too robust. So we come in every now and then and we notch that dam down about 6 inches or so, just to free up that back storage of water. We have a lot of in-stream detention facilities in Bellevue, and we need that capacity come into our winter months. Sometimes we need to do full removal of our dams. So the picture in the upper right is a picture of a dam that was built right in front of a culvert that goes over under 108th Street. And if that dam were to get much bigger, that water is going to end up out on the street. So in that case, if that dam were to break, it's going to go inside that culvert and we're never going to be able to get it out. So this is a full removal case. This is where we go in, we talk to our permit agencies, and then we coordinate to remove that entire dam in one sitting in 6-inch lifts there. This one, ironically, we removed the entire dam. They came back and built a new one inside the culvert, which we had to remove again. And we also used trapping at that point to relocate many of the beavers there to a different site. And I'll talk to you a little more about trapping when we get a little farther along. So deceivers and pond levelers. I don't know how many of these you folks have tried. Deceivers are what you see in the bottom right there. That's just basically a cage built out around the front of your culverts to keep the beavers from coming and going inside of those culverts. We had 2 of them inside those culverts building dams in there, and as you can imagine, it's pretty difficult to crawl in there and get that debris out. So building this and monitoring it is an effective means of how to control them. The pond levelers we have not had good success with. It takes a lot of water above and below your dam to put in an effective pond leveler and maintain it. We've had pond levelers that have washed out. We've had pond levelers that have been incorporated into the dams by the beavers. And we've had pond levelers that have just got filled with debris and failed. Ongoing monitoring of all these sites is incredibly important. We have about 25, 30 sites that we monitor at any given time. And that might be weekly monitoring if the dam is active. It might be monthly monitoring if the dam is not so active. But you need to have a monitoring program for each of these sites. And then how you maintain and monitor these sites after you have them established, that's the in-house versus contractor approach. So the way we do it is if we have a new site or a new dam that appears, we will manage that site with our in-house staff for a week or 2 or maybe a month until such point where we feel that we have it under control, we know how we want to maintain it, and then we put it on our contractor list for them to monitor and maintain after that. All right, we also do flood protection in Bellevue. So this is a culvert underneath one of our roadways. Builds a lot of sediment up under that culvert. We can't let it build up all the way to the top, so we have to remove that. So we go in here every few years, crawl on our hands and knees, and put a Vector hose down there to remove that sediment. Permit required maintenance. If you build a lot of in-stream engineering projects, they come with permit requirements. This one was a project to control sedimentation from getting into the gravel beds downstream that were built to help the salmon. So we had to come in on this one every couple of years and remove sediment from a sediment trap inside of this vault. And as you can see, it's pretty labor intensive to get in there and get that done. Then there's emergencies. The 3 pictures on the left are a landslide that filled our detention pond. That bottom picture on the left there, that's one of our guys in there. And he created an air wand there where he put a long piece of tubing on the end of an air compressed hose, pinched the end of it, and put a valve on it so he could shoot compressed air down into the sediment and the muck to try to find that outlet structure to free it up. Top right is a culvert that failed on us, got bent over, so we had to take an emergency HPA to go in and fix that. And then the bottom right is a flooding problem. It's the same channel, both pictures, but that grass was clogging that channel to the point where we had upstream flooding and had to take an emergency action to go fix that. Okay, so I just showed you some examples. That's what you might expect if you're working in the urban environment, if you're working in natural systems. So how do you do all this? Planning is your friend. So get it all written down up front. Take the time to write down all your sites that you have around your city, what you do, why you do, define the problem. This is going to be used to help you manage your system. It's also going to be used to help you sell your management of your system to your permit agencies. What you want to include in this is you want to include where everything is, how you're going to inspect those, when an inspection requires maintenance, when it triggers maintenance, how you're going to do your work methods when you do have maintenance. So how you're going to remove sediment from that site, for instance. How are you going to sequence your construction, meaning how your truck's going to come and go and how your excavator is going to move around on these sites. Include any diagrams that you have, include any designs that you have. Some of these sites might be pre-constructed and the engineers may have already thought of this. For some of our larger sedimentation facilities, we have built-in bypasses. So the engineers did think about how to dewater those sites ahead of building those sites. Think about what you're going to do with your sediment that you pull out of these sites. Do you need to test it? Is there contaminants in that sediment that needs to go somewhere else? And then the timing. Most of your stream work, most of your natural systems work is going to be have to be done during certain months of the summer, called the fish window around Western Washington here. I don't know when it is on Eastern Washington, so maybe somebody could share that. Think about how you're going to do your fish exclusion. Over here, we have to remove all the fish from the work area. We have to catalog all the fish, so we capture them. And that's what you're seeing in the bottom left there. There's some of my guys fishing. We capture them, we put them into holding tanks, and our biologists internally want to know what we're getting out of the streams. So we measure them, we try to type them the best we can. And then once we're convinced that those fish are alive and well, we'll put them upstream or downstream into some appropriate pools. This requires some training. You can't just throw one of these electro backpacks on and go do it. You got to send their staff down and get trained in how to operate this effectively. You're actually putting electricity into the stream with one of these, so you can hurt people if you're not careful. And then we do a lot of network as well. It's just a lot of patience and a lot of trial and error to get it right. Those big white bags you see on the right, that's for bypassing that stream into our control structure, which is behind the bucket of the excavator there. You also need to have a monitoring plan when your work is underway. Typically, your monitoring is for turbidity, but your permit agencies may require you monitor something else. Make sure you have emergency procedures defined in your plan. What happens if you get a big storm event that comes through and washes out your bypass? How are you going to overcome that? How are you going to get back on track? How are you going to ensure that you're not adding to downstream pollution if that happens? And then documenting everything. You need to put that, you need to write down how you're going to document in this document ahead of going and getting your permits. Now, what does all this do? This helps establish a professional approach to how you're going to do your work. And then what are we going to do with this now? We're going to use this to sell our leadership on a robust program to do this work, as well as our permit agencies, and build some trust with them moving forward. So speaking of permitting for this work, why are you doing this permitting? The first thing you need to understand, you're doing it for the health of the streams, you're doing it because you're a good environmental steward, and you're doing it because it's the law. So there are a lot of permit types when you're working in streams and lakes. Your main one is this hydraulic project approval from the Fish and Wildlife Department. And that plan that you put together in the last slide, you're going to use that plan to give to Fish and Wildlife as your project plan to permit this work. And we're talking year-round project work here, not just project by project site. I like to try to permit multiple sites in one permit if I can. It's not always possible, but working with your agencies, often it is. Other permits that you may run into are clear and grade permits issued by your local municipality or county. Land use permits, especially if you're working around sensitive or critical areas. Shoreline permits if you're on the shores of lakes. Or you may find yourself getting an Army Corps permit. I have one project that I do in Maidenbower Bay of Lake Washington that requires an Army Corps permit because it's within navigable waters. I can't stress enough how much building relationships with your permit agencies helps. So if you don't know your permit agencies right now and you don't know who those people are, go look them up, go introduce yourself, go learn their names. When I do my annual work on our sediment removal sites for our culverts, there's about 45 sites that we look at the beginning of the year, and then we put together a list. And the first thing we do is we call our fish and wildlife biologists. We invite them out for a drive around Bellevue to look at each and every site and get their thoughts on them before we go ahead and do that work. And I would be in trouble with my staff if I didn't mention aquatic invasives. So in Bellevue, we have New Zealand mud snails. That's a picture of them on the bottom left over that coin. horrible little things. The fish eat them. They think they're filling up on food, but they're not. They're these little snails. They don't break down inside the fish. And the thought is eventually the fish will starve to death from eating these little things. They multiply like crazy, and they're very, very hard to get rid of once we have them in our streams. That map on the right that you see there, that's a bunch of sites around town that we keep track of. When we find new snails in the red and the purple, that means it's a site that we've identified that have mud snails. The orange and the yellow, those are sites that potentially have them, but we actually haven't found them. And then the green is where we don't believe they are at this point. But you need to talk to your staff about this. If you're going to be working in streams, this is important because we don't want to be moving invasives around. It's against the law. The best way to prevent that is just to stay out of the streams. So if you can minimize the amount of work you do in streams, great. If you can't, if you have to go in the streams, there's some other ways you can do it. If you're only going in once in a while, then those boots, the gear you take into the streams, you can clean it up real good. You can set it off to the side and let it dry for a month, 2 weeks, a month, and then it's probably fine. If you're going in and out of streams more often, you need to decontaminate that gear. So you can use heat, you can freeze it, or you can use chemicals. We have a heat station set up at one of our service centers in Bellevue where we can spray that gear off with extremely hot water and cook those little mud snails right off of there. We also use chemicals out in the field. I think it's called zircon. It's a chemical that we can drop our boots and gear into and then wash them off when we get back to the office there. And then in any contracts that you have with contractors going out to work in your streams, please make sure you have provisions in there that speak about aquatic invasives and that what they need to do to make sure that they're decontaminating and following the appropriate procedures. And with that, I am happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Don. That was a very interesting presentation for sure. We do have some questions popping up, and I have some as well. Still getting my head around that. That was a outside of the box presentation, so I appreciate you bringing that to the table. I guess the first question we have is, does Bellevue have a general HPA for regular maintenance, which allows for in-stream sediment removal at and near culverts and other structures, or does that work require individual project HPAs?
Both. So we have a general HPA for those known sites where we do work every year to every 5 years, and we identify that in that planning document. We have to pull individual HPAs for sites that pop up that are not on our radar. When something happens that's extraordinary, that's above and beyond what we have written in our general HPA plan. So it's a combination of both, and it's a lot of discussion with our local area biologist.
For the benefit of the rest of us, can you define what an HPA is?
Sure. An HPA is a hydraulic project approval permit issued from Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife. It allows you to do work below the ordinary high water mark in waterways.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next question is, out of curiosity, where are some of the beaver dams located? This person was an intern for Bellevue Transportation for some time and have no idea where there are so many in the city.
Oh, good lords. I think we're up to 40 plus sites right now that we monitor for beaver dams, whether they be active or not active. Our active sites, just off the top of my head right now, a couple of them are 108th Street, where it goes under where North of Way is. Maiden just upstream of Maidenbower Bay, where the outfall is there. Northeast 6th Street off of 148. I have a whole spreadsheet of them.
Somebody says Northeast 24th and 140th.
Yeah, Brian's one of our technical specialists. So thank you, Brian.
Okay, another one just came in. It says, regarding thresholds for maintenance, do you find that site-specific thresholds are needed, or is it possible to use the same threshold among similar sites, e.g. sediment depth, vegetation density?
Mm-hmm. Again, the answer is both. So if you have similar sites, so let's say you have pipe ends. So you can categorize all your pipe ends that go under roadways into a very similar type of maintenance. You're not going to be going in there with full-on excavators taking truckload after truckload. You might be going in with a vector and just pulling out 2 to 5 yards. on each of those pipe ends. If you have larger sites that require excavation, you can bunch all those together, because the impacts of rolling in with an excavator are much more so than pulling up along the side of the road with a vacuum.
So I had a question revolving around that regarding that as well, since you're on the topic. So you have routine maintenance procedures that you have, but I'm sure you have event-driven response that you have to go into natural systems. How do you bridge the gaps for event-driven response versus routine maintenance in natural systems?
So in my planning document there, I have an emergency procedures section in there. So that Beaver Dam that I showed you that was about to go inside that culvert, the one we did a full removal on. So that was a standalone HPA that we had to get on that because it was unexpected. We found it out of the blue and it was about to cause an emergency. So we had to get an emergency HPA working with our biologists and then come up with a short-term plan on how we were going to remove that, ensuring that we don't cause downstream turbidity in that stream channel. So yes, some of them fall outside of your planning document, but you need to have a procedure in place and an understanding with your regulatory agencies on how you're going to deal with those.
Thank you. Thank you. That actually ties into this next question. Are there regulations that protect beaver populations, dams, and impoundments, for example, for fish habitat function? So how do you navigate the regulations protecting the beavers when you have to do your maintenance for your water systems?
I don't know of any regulations that protect the beaver population per se. The regulations do protect the fish habitat, and beavers do provide habitat for the fish, but I don't know of anything that actually protects the critter itself. I hope that answers your question.
Do you get permits from ecology or the Corps for ditch maintenance if the ditch is connected to a stream or wetland? So is there a line between maintenance and construction or installation? Where's your permit threshold?
Yeah, that's where you need to have a discussion with your area biologists on where they consider their maintenance, their thresholds of what is a stream and what is a natural systems versus what is part of your MS4. So I would encourage you that if you have those carryover areas, you have that discussion with your regulatory agencies, and that would be both Fish and Wildlife and the Department of Ecology.
An interesting comment here. Some of us just listened to 2 O&M talks, Bellevue and Spokane. Would Trey and Don be willing to discuss some of the common features versus the locally specific ones? I think it's a good discussion starter. I don't know that we have time today, and I'm not prepared for it, but thank you for the idea. It's something that we should mull over. Maybe
a future talk there to get a few of us together and discuss our different methods.
Yes, indeed. We have very little time left, but let's field this if we can. Have you had an experience where an in-stream culvert was accused of causing issues such as aggradation or erosion on private property downstream? If so, did the city take the lead to address it?
I can't think of one that comes to mind, but I wouldn't be surprised if we haven't. If it was something the city constructed and the design of it caused damage into the future, yes, I would believe the city would be responsible for fixing that damage.
And with that, I would like to thank everybody for their time. Thank you, Don, for a very interesting talk. If you have further questions for Don, his info is in the bio, or you can find it through the Municon documentation, and I'm sure he'd be happy to field your questions offline. Thank you all very much. Thank you for being here, and you have a great day.
Yeah, thank you.